Hello, I'm Melissa Idris, and with me today I have Professor Jayati Ghosh, who is a Professor of Economics at Nehru University in India. She's also the Executive Secretary of International Development Economics Associates, or IDEA, which is an international network of heterodox development economists. And very exciting to have you here. You're in town for the Khazanah Megatrends 2019, speaking about growth and development. So thank you so much for taking time off to be on the show today.
It's a pleasure.
So you're known as the feminist economist for your feminist economics. And I want to talk to you about that first off, because I think that economics has made very little progress over the years in closing the gender gap. And this is important to look at because given the field's prominence in determining public policy, we should be addressing this issue. So I want to get your thoughts on that. Do you think there is a gender gap or gender bias in economic policy?
Absolutely. I think a lot of economic policy is completely gender blind, and that has all kinds of implications in terms of unintended effects, or sometimes, in fact, in not achieving your planned goals, or not even identifying the problem properly.
Right.
So there are lots of ways in which economies lose out because of the bias of economic policies. But in fact, the discipline of economics also has a very big gender gap.
Right,
and
that means not enough female economists?
And, well, let me put it this way, there's not enough diversity in general.
Okay.
If you look at prominent economists, very few women, very few people from different backgrounds, whether ethnic or in India caste. Globally, it's dominated by the North Atlantic rather than developing countries. All of this matters because it affects the questions people ask, it affects the methodologies they use for the answers, and it affects the results. So in a way, we lose. There have been lots of discussions at the Megatrends Forum about how diversity is really important to advance human knowledge. It's not just enough to have really smart, bright people, but if they're all the same, they're not going to be as good at innovating, inventing, discovering new things.
So just to touch a little bit on that, about gender diversity in economics, I read something that was really interesting. Research by Mohsin Javdani as well as Hajun Chang found that female economists exhibit less ideological bias compared to their male counterparts, and they're able to set aside their biases based on their experiences. So that tells me that perhaps male economists are very set in their ways, and you might not get a lot of change in economic thinking through male economists.
Yes, well, I won't say all men, but certainly, yeah, and the dominant tendency in mainstream economics is this very alpha male kind of approach, which is that we know, we've got it, we've understood it, and you don't really have much to teach me.
So has it gotten better, in recent years? I mean, has economic policy seen its Me Too time's up moment?
Not enough.
Okay.
It's getting better slowly, but there's still a lot of open and sometimes very latent and implicit discrimination. I think there are some lucky ones like me. We managed to be successful. We kind of slipped through the cracks. But there are lots of very bright young women who either get depressed or discouraged early on, and who are, even when they have very insightful kinds of research and so on, they don't get the credit and they don't get the recognition that they deserve.
How do we encourage or incorporate more diversity in economic policy making?
One very important thing, of course, is to have more women economists in the first place who are actually actively engaged in policy. Another is, in fact, in governments, because there's really not enough representation of women in governments. And I find that this is one of those cases where numbers matter. It's not enough to have the token woman. Because you end up having to behave like a man. And I've been the token woman long enough to know that. So
too many manuals, is it?
Exactly. You really need to have more and more women also in economic decision making at different levels. And I think that's, when there are enough of them, you can change the culture of an organization, the approach, the economic perspectives you bring. And I think that's absolutely essential.
Okay. I want to talk a little bit about the public value of care and the politics of women's work, because care services, I mean, for years, decades, historically has been taken for granted. It's unrecognized, and almost, I guess, the unsung heroes in all societies. It cuts across, doesn't it? But talk to me about the public value of that, one that's often not taken into account in a national development.
Absolutely. You know exactly what you said, that so much of care work is actually performed by women who are unpaid within households or communities, or underpaid by communities. Because once you have this paid to unpaid spectrum, then two things happen. One is that the work itself gets undervalued because so much of it is done for free. And then those who do that free work, anything where they go for paid work gets underpaid.
Right.
And that kind of wage penalty, we find, extends into all care activities, which are typically not seen as skilled, even though some of them require a lot of skill. Like looking after the young, we know that there's a lot involved in nursery training and in all of that. Preschool training, looking after the old, geriatric training, it's actually quite specialized. We don't give it any value. We think it can be done by unpaid women working at home. Whereas, in fact, then when you do provide the paid services, the people who do those paid services also get paid very little.
Right, they're underpaid. So what kind of structural issues have allowed for this to kind of perpetuate over the years?
Essentially, the one-line answer is patriarchy. Basically, it's the gender construction of society. It's the whole idea that women's place is to look after people, and that we are more caring, loving, compassionate, and we'll do it. And when that whole responsibility is put on you, and when young girls are socialized from very early on that this is really their role in society, it's really hard to break. And of course, it's very convenient, not just for men, but for the economy, because this is actually providing a massive subsidy to the formal economy. All this unpaid work, it provides a subsidy in two ways. One is that you're getting all this, the whole economy is getting a lot of this work done for free. Another is that, when you have crises, when you want the fiscal adjustment, when governments want to cut down, somebody has to keep doing this work. So the burden shifts to households. So you know that there is this household available for you to actually push around and be flexible.
Okay.
So governments use that to actually cope with the business cycle. The burden is borne by women in households.
Is this, a developing country issue, or does it cut across all countries?
To some extent, it cuts across all countries. We know that in Europe, in the Eurozone crisis, when they cut back on a lot of the public services that they provided, it was women who actually had to deal with all of that extra burden of work. But in developing countries, it's really extreme. And it's structural. It's not just over a business cycle. It's something systemic.
Okay. All right. We're going to come back and continue our conversation with Prof. Jayati after this. Stay tuned.